Appreciate you all being here. I got to tell you, though, I wish I didn't have to compel you all to be here. We asked you as legislative liaisons to come participate with us, in which you refused. So the Committee on Oversight will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We have a couple goals for the hearing in our investigation and our need to do our constitutional duty. One, the FBI needs to produce its full investigative file to the United States Congress. And I mean the full file, not just the parts the FBI deemed relevant. Right now we only have the 302s handpicked by the FBI. We decide what's relevant, not the Department of Justice, not the FBI. We're entitled to the full file. Two, all unclassified portions of the file should be released to the public as quickly as possible. It has been more than 20 days since I'm sure the very first FOIA request was put out there, and by law that should be out there. I want to commend the FBI for already releasing its investigative summary report and Secretary Clinton's 302 interview summary to the public. We do appreciate that, and it's duly noted. But there are still a number of 302s left for the FBI to release. We were surprised to learn that the 302s, the so-called investigative files provided to the United States Congress, at least to the security officer, were only a portion of them, not all of them. And three, all members of Congress should be able to review the entire file. Right now, unless you're part of the Intel Committee, Oversight Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Appropriations Committee, these are if you're a member, you have to be on those committees in order to view what is currently in the SCIF. It's unclear to me how the FBI can prevent a member of Congress from seeing what we're already allowed to see by law, yet here they have done so. Even the unclassified information, that's what's mystifying to me. Even the unclassified information you're preventing members of Congress from seeing. But we do believe we should be able to see the file and the whole file. And it's disappointing that we are here today. We have a number of questions about the redactions, the classifications. I thought a number of those things would best be answered in a briefing. You know, Elijah Cummings, the ranking member here, has made a point on several occasions that rather than just going right into a hearing, let's go to a briefing. We had legitimate questions. We did have this plan for last week. We did have more than 12 members of the Congress show up to have that briefing, and none of you showed up. That's inexcusable. You're the congressional affairs officers. It's your job to talk to Congress. And for some of you, I had to threaten to send a subpoena just to get you to appear today. We did some math. We got 70 of you sitting here. Between your compensation and your benefits package, you make more than $1 million from taxpayers. Taxpayers are paying you more than $1 million. And you won't even come talk to Congress. What do you do all day if you don't talk to Congress? That's your job. So we're going to do that today. And the irony here is we're trying to protect the classified information. I didn't create this mess. Hillary Clinton created this mess. There are years of federal records. Some of it's so classified, none of us in this room should probably see them. Most of it's unclassified. But we have a duty and an obligation to protect that information. I believe that's probably the same goal that you have. But we're going to have a reality check here. She's the one that took the records from the State Department, gave access to people who don't have security clearances. The case is closed. There's no consequences, nobody being held accountable. But we also had an FBI director come and testify that he never looked at her testimony under oath. And somehow we have a classified system and we have a non-classified system, and somehow information was going from the classified system into a non-classified system. So it's ironic that you don't want to appear before this committee out of a concern for protecting classified information when Hillary Clinton walked around with a BlackBerry full of classified information and gave access to sensitive federal records to folks without security clearances at all. I want to understand from each of you what it is you think that Congress should not see. See, I believe passionately in the role of Congress. I believe passionately in the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. We were founded in 1814. Every expenditure, everything we do in this Congress, or everything we do in this nation is supposed to be overseen by us. We can investigate anything at any time. That's what's different about the United States of America. We're different because we are self-critical. We do go look under the hood. We do hold people accountable. That's why when Abraham Lincoln joined the United States Congress, he was on this committee. And he peppered the president because he didn't believe that the Mexican-American War started as the president said it was. And there's been a rich history of that throughout generations. We can't do that when each of the agencies that you all represent decide that, well, we're just going to show you the relevant information. We're not even going to answer your questions. You can't see those documents. That's the way a banana republic acts. It's not the way the United States of America acts. So we expect better, and we expect you to be responsive. And I don't expect to have to issue a subpoena to see unclassified information. While we can't be certain what is under each of the redactions within the documents, as far as we can tell, the redactions are covering information commonly given to Congress, such as names of key fact witnesses, titles and positions of government employees at the State Department, and Gmail accounts. There's nothing classified about that information. While I understand there's an argument to withhold information under the Privacy Act or the Freedom of Information Act, neither of those apply to Congress or any other committees. As I understand it, the FBI is not withholding any information based on the Privacy Act. Instead, they just don't want to give us the information. So there's really no legal basis for these redactions. The FBI also chose to redact any information in the report classified above secret. This also makes no sense. As a member of Congress, we routinely receive documents and briefings from the intelligence community at the highest levels of classification, with the exception of sources, methods, with the exception of the SAP material. So any redactions have to be based on classification that have to be removed. We have to be able to see that information. We also have questions on what the FBI file contains. Oddly enough, the copies of the file provided to us by the FBI are different. We are very grateful that they provided the first set on a Tuesday. I believe it was August 16th. The next day, we got a second set. Problem is, the second set had 27 emails more than the other one, which we were grateful for. It was an improving file. Only to have the FBI try to come back and recover those. Not because it was SAP material, because it's embarrassing. That's why it was embarrassing. But we should have had it in the first round. We should have had it at the very beginning. I also want to put this request in context because it's far from the first time Congress or even this committee has requested an investigative file from the FBI or the Department of Justice. Congressional committees are routinely provided investigative materials by the Department of Justice and the FBI. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the 2007 CRS report.
Just a brevity.
This was done.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, my name is Deirdre Walsh, and I serve as Director of Legislative Affairs for the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper. I'm here in response to the committee's request to answer questions about the recent document production by the FBI to Congress related to former Secretary of State Clinton's email. While I understand the Intelligence Community Inspector General, or ICIG as we refer to him, may have interacted with the interagency with regard to these documents, by statute, the ICIG maintains his own interactions with the Congress separate from my office. Accordingly, I cannot speak on behalf of the ICIG. With regard to the documents produced by the FBI and the subject of this hearing, ODNI was not involved with this document production. I will, however, do my best to answer any of the questions that you may have. Additionally, I'm joined by my colleagues from the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and the National Security Agency in response to the committee's request. Given the classification of the underlying material, we look forward to discussing sensitive matters in the closed portion of the hearing. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. It's my understanding, Mr. Higgins, Mr. Samuel, and Mr. Soul, that Ms. Walsh's statements reflect the IC. Okay. We'll now recognize myself for the first set of questions. Mr. Herring, what information do you believe that Congress does not have the right to see?
So we believe it's important for oversight committees to understand how the FBI reached our conclusion.
No, wait. I'm asking you a philosophical question here. What does Congress not have the right to see?
So I don't know if I can answer that in a way that, I think there's more to it than a simple answer. I think that each case is sort of specific to its own set of facts. I think Director Comey tried to be as transparent as he could with this committee.
Do you think he could be
other committees as he responsibly can be? So I think when he spoke and he answered questions.
Wait, what is it that I, as a member of Congress, or any member on this Congress, either side of the aisle, what is it that you believe we don't have the right to see? See, this is the way our government works. We get to do oversight. That's why since 1814 this committee has been doing that. There's executive privilege. Let me help you. There's executive privilege. Has the President invoked executive privilege in this case?
No.
The answer is no. Good. That's right. The answer is no. Is there any other situation?
Look, when it comes to classified information and the classification that deals in the executive order, not all the information that we have in our files belongs to us. We defer to other agencies when it comes to access to their classified information.
But you are the ones that put redactions on personal identifiable information, correct?
We did on the personal identifiable information, that's correct.
Where in the Constitution does it say that I can't see that?
Does it address it specifically in the Constitution?
So, can you cite any legal case, any precedent that says that Congress can't look at personal identifiable information?
I cannot cite any legal case.
Are you aware that Congress is exempt from the Privacy Act?
I am.
Does the FBI treat congressional document requests as FOIA requests?
No.
Will the FBI provide Congress all of the 302s?
All of the 302s, we have one set that you've been provided already. The rest of them are coming through the FOIA process.
Wait.
Yep.
We're not, FOIA process? You mean I got to fill out a FOIA request?
You can. Not necessary.
Here's the problem. You handpicked the 302s to give to us. My understanding of discussion with staff, and I appreciate your accessibility with the staff. You've been good, and you're new, and for your first time hearing, this is a tough one, but the reality is you should give us all the 302s.
So let me say this. I think the director made principled decisions about what to say to Congress when he was here and also what to provide to Congress. As far as wait,
where do I find that? Do we just let everybody in government decide that they're based on their own individual principles? That's what see, it's trust but verify is how it works. You don't get to decide what I get to see. I get to see it all. I was elected by some 800,000 people to come to Congress and see classified information. I was elected by my colleagues here to be the chairman of this committee. That's the way our Constitution works. Will the FBI provide to Congress the full file with no redactions of personal identifiable information?
I cannot make that commitment sitting here today.
Then I'm going to issue a subpoena, and I'm going to do it right now. So let's go. I've signed this subpoena. We want all the 302s, and we would like the full file. You can accept service on behalf of the FBI?
Certainly.
You are hereby served. We have a duty and a responsibility. You can cite no precedent, nothing in the Constitution, no legal precedent. You know this is important to us. You now have your subpoena. We would all like to see this information. I've gone past my time, or coming up on going past my time. I'll now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings.
You've been in the job 4 weeks. I can't hear you.
Yes, sir.
And you used to work for one of our distinguished colleagues, Mr. Goodlatte, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Republican. So I'm going to, so you're familiar with Congress then?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to save most of my questions for the classified session, but I do want to address the redaction issue briefly. When the FBI produced these materials to Congress, their cover letter stated, and I quote, "The FBI has redacted personally identifiable information as appropriate," end of quote. Chairman
for the
Chaffetz
people that are not
publicly
already in the
announced he
public.
wanted the FBI.
And really, from my perspective as an agent, this is Jason talking.
How long have you been an agent?
17 years.
Okay.
And so, from my perspective as an agent, I think we have to protect the integrity of our investigations. And I don't want there to be a chilling effect, or I wouldn't want there to be a chilling effect for other people cooperating in similar cases like this going forward.
Well, one of the things that I asked Director Comey about was this whole process when you've got the Congress getting more and more information from the FBI, and whether it would have a chilling effect. Do we place ourselves in a position where if the Congress does not like a decision made by the agency, then dig. I mean, how much, how often will that be happening? In other words, so that chilling effect, and then I wonder, will other people, if the decision, somebody in Congress doesn't like the decision, do we set more and more precedents so that people can come in behind? And Director Comey said he had an all-star group of agents, and they had a unanimous decision. And I just, but you were talking about the chilling effect. So do you think that? But first of all, who made the decision with regard to the redactions? Since that's what we're supposed to be here about. I mean, I'm just curious who makes those decisions.
I think that was made at the highest levels in the Bureau.
And does that mean Director Comey?
Absolutely.
All right.
If I could say just sort of.
Please do. I thought I had some time, but go ahead.
I mean, I do think it's reasonable to think there would be a chilling effect. This is a very public case. Everybody out there is watching it. And we start lifting person identifiable information, I think that potentially could have some impact going forward. I do think, though, that we're not trying to play hide the ball with Congress. We want Congress to be able to do its job, this particular oversight committee to do its job, and to understand really, what we did in the investigation, how we came to that conclusion, and we did that in part by, releasing the investigative summary and the 302s.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Some of the 302s. And when you don't show up at a meeting that we request behind closed doors, kind of lose that opportunity.
If I could.
Now we're going to recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Agent Herring, did the FBI interview the sender of all emails that contain classified information?
I don't know the answer to that question, only because I'm a Ledge Affairs guy. I was on the investigative team.
Can you find out? You would agree with me it'd be important. I mean, you'd want to interview the person who sent the classified information, right?
Certainly.
Because the recipient thought the C was just the third letter in the alphabet. You might be curious whether or not the sender also was clueless in the way he or she viewed classified information, would you not?
That would be a logical investigative step.
Can you find out whether or not you interviewed the sender of all emails that contain classified information?
Certainly.
Do you know if the sender of any of the classified emails knew that the information was classified at the time?
I don't personally know that. I wasn't part of the investigative team. I'm sure that.
Can you find out?
Certainly.
Can you find out for me?
Yes, sir.
There are folks wondering how information gets from a classified source into an email. Did your investigation shed any light on how classified information could get from a classified system into an unclassified email to even be sent? I'm not even talking about the receiving of it. I'm talking about the sending of it.
I'm sure they did look at that. That would be sort of a logical question you would ask as an investigator in a case like this.
That's what I thought.
But in my legislative sort of affairs capacity, I just don't have that kind of visibility.
Well, don't sell yourself short. You used to be an agent, right? Still an agent, right? So you know what you're doing. Did the FBI grant immunity to anyone during the course of its investigation?
For immunity questions, I'd have to defer to the Department of Justice for that. It wouldn't be an agent who would grant that kind of thing.
Did the Bureau recommend the granting of immunity?
I do not know.
Do you know whether the Department of Justice granted immunity to any witnesses?
I know I saw some articles last week, but that's the extent of it.
Well, surely you got better sources than the media for that, don't you? You can ask the guy sitting 2 people down from you.
I would have to defer to the Department of Justice, sir.
Do you know whether any witnesses asserted any privileges while they were being interviewed?
I don't know.
But the Bureau would know that, right? Because they would have asserted the privilege while you were in there.
I'm sorry?
The Bureau would know that, right? Because that privilege would have been asserted perhaps while you were in there conducting the interview.
What kind of privilege are you talking about, like attorney-client privilege?
Oh, there are a bunch of privileges. There's priest-penitent. I'm guessing that one didn't come up. There's doctor-patient. I'm guessing that one didn't come up. There's the Fifth Amendment privilege against incrimination. That one might have come up. Attorney-client privilege, again, there have been media reports that one came up.
Sir, I just don't know the answer to those questions.
Have you ever had the attorney-client privilege come up during any of your investigations?
Certainly.
Who does the privilege belong to?
The client?
So the client can waive it, right?
Can.
You understand why Congress might want to know whether or not the attorney-client privilege was waived and who the client was?
I can certainly imagine.
Yeah, me too. That's why we want to see the file, Agent. I mean, you say it's unprecedented. Mr. Cummings used to be a criminal defense attorney. He got to see all your 302s. Ken Buck used to be an assistant United States attorney. He got to see all your 302s. Probation officers get to see all your 302s. Why can't Congress?
Sir, I think we have tried to provide the information in a way that is understandable. I think the investigative summary tells kind of the story, and I do think that the 302s that we provided are the important ones.
Well, let me ask you this. If those summaries were all anyone ever needed, why don't you just introduce those in trial? Why actually call the witness?
Well, certainly we actually trying to make your life a little bit easier in the light of the
But see, I don't want my life being made easier. I don't want that. I want to know what was said in the 302s. Because the 302 is itself a summary of an interview, right? It's not a verbatim transcript.
That's correct.
So you have given me the summary of an interview. And I'm not asking for a verbatim transcript because you don't have one.
Certainly.
I'm just asking for the 302. So I don't have to read your summary. I may read the 302 differently from the way you read it. So why not?
So I think we've given you the relevant ones as we've
relevant according to whom? I am telling you, I don't think you've given me all the relevant 302s.
Well, the remainder of the 302s will come out through the FOIA process.
But since when did Congress have to go through FOIA
Correct.
to obtain 302s from an investigation that's not even resulting in any prosecutions that your boss has already said is over? Since when did we have to go through FOIA?
So I think that the 302s we have provided, I think that we made a principled decision about what to provide. It was certainly made at the highest levels of my agency.
All right, I'm out of time. That's what that knocking sounds. I'm just going to say with all due respect, you don't get to decide what we think is relevant. And I do say that respectfully. The defense attorneys get it all. I think Congress ought to get it all.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentlewoman from New York, Ms. Maloney, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to reserve my questions to the closed session, but I would like to clear up some misconceptions. I would say that the campaign season is upon us, and the accusations and the charges and the attacks are almost out of control. I just spent, I won't get into it, but anyway, for several weeks, the chairman has been appearing on national television saying that the reason that he cannot see these emails is because the FBI produced to Congress is because they are such a highly sensitive, classified, high level. And for example, he stated that these materials were, and I would like to put his quote in the record, so secure and sensitive that even I, as the chairman of the Oversight Committee, did not have the proper clearance to see it. But in fact, as I understand it, Mr. Herring, Chairman Chaffetz has not been able to view these documents. The reason he hasn't been able to see them is because the Republican chairman of the Intelligence Committee has not allowed him to do so. The documents were produced and given to the Intelligence Committee, and the Intelligence Committee has a process by which they release the documents to people, and he has the same clearance as any other member of Congress who's not on the Intelligence Committee. And so the reason he hasn't been able to get them is because his own party's leadership has not voted to give him this clearance. Now, as I understand it, the FBI produced a small subset of these emails only to the Intelligence Committee. And according to House rules, the Intelligence Committee has the jurisdiction over certain agencies, and these agencies report to the Intelligence Committee. So it has documents. So
Will the gentlewoman yield?
I most certainly will.
Any one of the 4 people from the intelligence community here can help answer this. Have you made redactions on personal identifiable information to the Intel Committee? Mr. Higgins, how about you?
No, we have not.
There's no redactions at the... Ms. Walsh?
Not to my knowledge.
Mr. Samuel?
No, Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge.
Mr. Sewell?
No, Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge.
Can you release these emails into the public? And if so, what would happen? Mr. Higgins, what happens if we release these emails that are on Hillary Clinton's unsecured server? What happens?
Mr. Chairman, I can confirm that CIA participated in a classification review process, and I'd be happy to talk about that process in closed session. Needless to say, some of the materials do include classified information that we do not believe is appropriate for public release.
And are some of these materials include sources and methods?
Mr. Chairman, I'd prefer to discuss any further matters relating to classification in closed session.
Gentlewoman's time has expired, but thank you so much for yielding to me.
But reclaiming my time, I get to close in my time. You took all my time. I thought the chairman could have, I think the chairman can have all the time he wants. I'd just like to conclude by saying, and I just ask for a second, just a second, what our committee is engaged in is nothing but a partisan attack on Secretary Clinton with an effort to harm or undermine her presidential campaign. That's all it is. Get the chairman of the Intelligence Committee to release the documents to you. No one is withholding it. The Intelligence Committee has jurisdiction over agencies, including the FBI. They release their information. They have a process. You have appealed to that process. Let's wait for that process. Ask him why he's not taking a vote to give you access to these documents. You're making it look like there's some conspiracy or some terrible thing happening when it's really nothing but a partisan attack on Secretary Clinton.
I think the gentlewoman, and I guess with some indulgence, where I have a problem is when they redact information that is deemed unclassified. I don't understand that. It makes no sense. And classification is one issue, but when they redact information that has already been designated as unclassified, I believe that Congress should be able to see that.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond?
Sure. Yeah.
In the hearings that we've had, the witnesses have testified that personal information that has been redacted has been to protect the privacy of people and personal information. Now that's on record. But in the classified section, we can have more of this clarified.
Thank you. And I appreciate the dialogue back and forth. Now let's recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Herring, let me just follow up where the chairman was. So did the FBI make the redactions dealing with personal identifiable information?
We did, yes.
You did. That's what I figured. Okay, Mr. Herring, you've said we don't have all the 302s. We don't have the whole file. And what you did give us, as you just pointed out, had lots of redactions.
Yes, sir.
And the chairman invited you to a briefing last week in a classified setting, which you said in your opening remarks where you'd like to discuss this information. So who told you not to come to the briefing? Because the chairman was there, I was there. In fact, every single Republican member was sitting there waiting anxiously for you to come do what you just said in your opening statement you wanted to do. So why didn't you show up?
So let me say a couple things here, if I could, just to sort of be clear. As far as the 302s and what we've provided and what we haven't provided, or a lot of 302s, there are dozens of them, and we prioritized up front what we thought were the most important ones. And so those are the ones we gave
But you got them all, don't
a couple of
you?
weeks. We do have, and we're working on the other
So you
ones.
can get the
We're working-
paper, you can give it to us, or frankly, you could have told us what you just told us right there. You could have told us that last Wednesday, but you didn't come. So why
Actually-
didn't you come?
So I actually want to address it in the classified setting if I could. There was certainly
Someone tell you not to come, Mr. Herring?
conversations. There's
Someone
some
tell you-
conversations between me and some of the committee staff about what the briefing was going to be about.
No, I'm asking, did someone tell you not to come? You were invited, we were all waiting. We don't have all the 302s, we don't have the whole file. You've told us you made all the redactions. We were going to ask you about that. We were going to do it in a classified setting, which is what you preferred, what you want, what you've told us today you want, and someone told you not to come. Who told you not to come?
It was my decision, but I'd like to explain it away in the
Wait,
classified
wait.
setting.
You decided on your own? You didn't consult with anyone else?
Certainly consulted with the director's office.
And the director said, it's up to you, Mr. Herring. I'm not going to decide. You're going to decide? Really?
So a lot of it has to do with what the discussion was going to be in the classified briefing. And I think there was some confusion, at least on my part, about what the expectations were and some of my conversations with committee staff last week.
Do you have any other discussion? Just you and Director Comey talked about this? You talked to anyone else?
Certainly, we have our general counsel's office, the Department of Justice. There are a number of people.
Mr. Herring, was this case different? You said you've been around the FBI 17 years. You're now the acting director for legislative affairs. Was this case different?
I think this case is different in a lot of ways.
A lot of ways.
I do.
Can you tell us, can you give me some, why? I know it's different in a lot of ways. How about this difference? You ever had a case in your 17 years where the subject of your investigation's husband meets with the Attorney General just a couple days before you're going to interview that individual in your investigation? You ever had that happen in your 17 years?
No, sir.
That's certainly different, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you ever have a case in your 17 years, and we appreciate your service, you ever have a case where the Attorney General announces publicly that she's going to follow the recommendations of the FBI, even though she has no idea what those recommendations are going to be, based on, you ever have that happen in your 17 years?
Not on one of the cases I was assigned.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's ever happened because the Attorney General told me she's never done that until this time.
Certainly.
You ever in your 17 years, you ever have a director of the FBI, you ever have them do a big press conference, walk through all the wrongdoings of the person under investigation? You ever have that happen, a big press conference before, and then make this big announcement? Or normally the FBI just kind of announces whether they're going to prosecute or not, right? You ever seen that before?
I mean, we certainly have press conferences, not quite like that one.
Not quite like that one. That's exactly right. And then have you ever had this? Now, maybe this happens, but Mr. Cummings said in his opening statement, Republicans didn't like the answers Mr. Comey gave. Well, that may be true, but based on what Mr. Comey did last week, where he sent a memo to you and all your colleagues, looks to me like a lot of former FBI agents, and maybe some even current ones, didn't like some of the answers they got from this investigation. You ever seen that before? Mr. Comey says in this letter, I explained to our alums, I'm okay if folks have a different view of this investigation. So there's obviously some folks who used to work in the Justice Department didn't like the outcome either. Now, they may be Republicans like Mr. Cummings says. They may not be. So I've never seen that before either. Have you, Mr. Herring?
Frequently, we get messages from the director on a variety of things.
Yeah.
I think in
2
this
months
case-
after he makes the announcements, he thinks it's important to send a memo out to 2 months later to all his employees and saying, hey, I better fill you in on some things here, why we did what we did. You ever have that happen 2 months after the fact?
I think oftentimes he wants the employees to understand what's going on and full level of transparency both outside the Bureau and inside the Bureau. We're a
So
big
2
agency.
months later, you got a memo.
36,000 or so employees.
This case was different, but here's the problem, Mr. Herring. It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be different. Everyone is supposed to be treated equally under the law. And I know deep down you know that. You're 17 years serving in our government. You know that, don't you? It's all, everyone's supposed to be treated the same, and in this case, this individual was treated different. And everyone in this country knows it, and that's why we're having this hearing, and that's why we'd have liked you there last week to give us the information a little sooner than later tonight when we go into a classified setting.
So can I answer that? I mean, I think it's important for us as an agency to be apolitical, to follow the facts in any case where it takes us. And I do believe that we follow the facts in this particular case, and Director Comey certainly made a very difficult decision, but ultimately it is the Department of Justice who makes the determination of prosecution.
No, hold on.
But real quick, not in this situation, because
Hold
she
on.
said she was going to take his recommendation.
The gentleman's time has
This
expired.
is a false statement.
We're now going to recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank you for your service. And then regrettably, second of all, I need to apologize for the way that you're being treated here today. I know that we've worked with a number of you in the past, and appreciate your service to the country. And like some folks here, I recognize the separation of powers. While I do agree that Congress has a very wide jurisdiction for investigation, I also know that we are not a law enforcement agency. We are not a trial agency. And under the separation of powers in this country, it's not consistent with the Constitution for the legislative branch to overturn a decision, especially on an investigation, in a potentially criminal investigation that, and you've decided not to prosecute. It is completely out of bounds for Congress to overturn it. And their lives will be turned upside down because of what this committee wants to do. And that is a violation of our Constitution and the individual rights of those individuals just from having been mentioned or being approached in an FBI investigation. So, Mr. Chairman, I think this is going in the totally wrong direction. This is a sad day in the history of this committee, I have to tell you. This is a sad goddamn day that we're doing this.
Gentleman's time has expired. I think the last comment not appropriate. It was a bit inappropriate. I will now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herring, we do have an important responsibility of members of this committee, unlike any other committee in Congress. We're the Investigations and Oversight Committee. The chairman went through the history of the committee and some of the investigations. This particular case we're talking to, dealing with Secretary Clinton's emails, the case was declared closed by the director, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And that came after, and I pointed this out the day he was here, just an unprecedented series of events, and Mr. Jordan, I think, relayed some of the timetable. On Friday, July 1st, the Attorney General said she would take whatever recommendations FBI came up with. On Saturday, the 2nd of July, the vans pull up and they interviewed the witness for what, 4 hours, was it?
Something like that. I
Yeah,
don't really
something
recall.
like that. And I asked the questions if it was recorded, and was no. Did he participate in it? The director, no. Then we found out that there were the 302s that were taken. Is that correct? The summaries are taken.
A 302 for Ms. Clinton? Yes.
Yes. Okay. And then on July 5th, the 4th was a Monday, it was announced by the director there would be no prosecution or case closed by basically the Attorney General the next day. That's pretty much the sequence, isn't it?
I think he made that recommendation.
Yeah,
Yes.
and the case is closed. Now, I've been on the committee longer than anyone here. I can never remember an instance, and the chairman went back to before the Teapot Dome scandal, when even during some of these investigations, we have always had access to information, and that has been the case, hasn't it? That we've always had access, unfettered access, the committee. Again, the chairman cited time after time.
I don't know about unfettered access before my time.
But we've gotten the information. Again, he has that, and I'd like it made part of the record, Mr. Chairman, the report that you have.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mm-hmm. And we do know that the secretary used a private server which had emails that contained classified information. Is that not right, Ms. Walsh? This community would agree on that?
About her use of a private server, sir?
The secretary used a private server, and on it, and going through the server was classified information. I mean, everybody, unless you're on another planet, knows that, including these. They're all shaking their head affirmatively. The director, when he was here, said he didn't know if there was a possibility that it could have been hacked, that information could have been made public. We have really a national security issue here, too, that Congress, in its responsibility to investigate, is now being denied the information about what really took place. You're participating in keeping that information from us, Mr. Herring.
If I could just say a couple of things. You know, one, on the personally identifiable information, I obviously have a subpoena here for that now. I engaged Mr. Chavitz's staff earlier today about a compromise that.
Well, we're going to get the 302s one way or another, but you have not given us all the 302s, right?
Not yet. We did prioritize them, and we did the most important.
That's not a question. You don't get to prioritize. Never in the history of investigations that I've participated in. We want the information. We are entitled to the information. We are the investigative branch. Collectively, we represent the American people.
Certainly.
And you have denied that. Now, we've had to file with you, Mr. Krasnick, a referral. How long before you act on the referral? You have the referrals?
We have the letter from the chairman and Chairman Goodlatte.
What's the timetable? I mean,
I can't give you a timetable. We've referred it. It's being reviewed, and I can't give you a timetable for an investigation.
You are, again, withholding information that this committee legitimately requested the director is, and he promised that he would provide us. That's not acceptable.
Gentleman's time has expired. Yes, the ranking member.
Just yield for just 1 second. Mr. Micah asked about, just asked a question that just sparked my interest. You said you were having discussions with the Republican staff. Is my staff involved in that? In those discussions? I'm just curious.
Not as of today, no, sir.
Not as of today?
Well, I had a conversation with Mr. Chavitz's staff earlier today, but your staff was not a part of it, sir.
Is that your normal course of doing things?
No,
we do represent 700,000 people each.
Yes, sir.
Over here. And you are from the Congress. You worked with Goodlatte, is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Chairman, there's an article that appeared today in Newsweek on emails in Newsweek magazine. I would ask that the article be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
And let me just read a little bit from this article. It says, Clinton's email habits look positively transparent when compared with the subpoena dodging, email hiding, private server using George W. Bush administration. Between 2003 and 2009, the Bush White House lost 22 million emails. 22 million. This correspondence included millions of emails written during the darkest period of America's recent history, when the Bush administration was ginning up support for what turned out to be a disastrous war in Iraq, with false claims that the country possessed weapons of mass destruction, and later when it was firing U.S. attorneys for political reasons. Like Clinton, the Bush White House used a private email server. It was owned by the Republican National Committee. And the Bush administration failed to store its emails as required by law and then refused to comply with a congressional subpoena seeking some of those emails. I guess the past is prologue. The chairman mentioned that Abraham Lincoln was a member of this committee. Abraham Lincoln, maybe that wasn't auspicious, Mr. Chairman, because he only served one term and couldn't get elected back home. He was a Whig at the time, and he spent his time worried about things like the Wilmot Proviso, trying to end the slave traffic in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, and fighting the slaveocracy and trying to move this country to limit and ultimately abolish a very evil institution. That's what he spent his time doing. We're spending our time trying to pillory somebody about how she handled her emails while she was traveling the world on behalf of this country to 111 countries, trying to restore U.S. credibility in foreign policy after the incredible damage done in 8 years of the previous administration. I guess if I were in my friend's situation, I'd grasp at this straw too. Mr. Herring, my friend Mr. Jordan, tried to suggest that you, the FBI, have handled this case very differently than the normal course of justice to an American citizen. I guess because of the high-profile nature, you handled it very carefully. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So it was different in that sense. But we had Director Comey, who was a, by the way, registered Republican until very recently. We had him before our committee, and I asked him under oath, did the witness involved, the primary witness here involving these emails, did she lie? No. Did she deceive? No. Did she evade? No. Did she obfuscate? No. Did she deliberately keep or withhold relevant information requested from the FBI? No. Is that your understanding as well?
I would refer to Director Comey's comments.
Mr. Micah says, or somebody said, the case is closed, and you affirm that.
Yes.
Why? Why is the case closed? What's your understanding of that, Mr. Herring?
Decision made at the highest level.
And the decision was, according, you said you've read the newspapers, the director of the FBI says it wasn't even a close call. Is that your understanding?
Correct, yes.
Correct. No special treatment here. It wasn't even a close call. This is political theater. 302s, could you tell us what 302s are? My friend Mr. Gowdy knows what they are, but not all of us do. We're not all lawyers.
So 302 for us is a term of art. It's simply a form that which we summarize in an interview.
And how often do you provide 302s to Congress?
Rarely.
Rarely? Why?
Usually, we don't share the investigative files outside of the.
So our request is unusual. Is that correct? You said you don't do it very often.
Correct. Yes, in some sense it is. We don't get that request very often, and we certainly don't provide them very often.
And to protect people.
Yes, sir.
From raw interviews. Is that correct?
Or
the summaries of those interviews.
To protect people from, I'm sorry, I missed the.
From raw material from an interview.
Certainly.
Right. Redactions. How unusual are redactions? This is unique to this case. Is that correct?
No, we do redactions from time to time.
Why?
Really, as far as people do have privacy interests. Anytime we release documents outside of the FBI, if it's in FOIA, if it's another avenue, you have to review those and apply.
If the chairman will indulge me one more question,
Certainly.
and then I'll cease and desist.
Gladly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herring, were you told at any time before this hearing or at any other time during this process that this is highly political and you should cover up, obfuscate, evade, deceive, or not provide information to protect somebody from our scrutiny?
No, not at all.
Has anybody at this table?
Gentleman's time has expired. We have votes on the floor that are 10 minutes away. We have members who still haven't asked questions, plus we need to do a recorded vote. So we're going to have to leave it here and now recognize
I appreciate the chairman's indulgence.
gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Herring, would you say that the FBI's investigation and the delivery of documents have been very systematic and principled?
Yes, as far as delivery of.
So there's no haphazard method of delivering documents?
The documents we provided to Congress, sir?
Yes.
No, I think it's been thoughtful and deliberative. And
Okay. Can you tell me why you didn't deliver the documents that the chairman asked for on July the 11th to the committee? You didn't deliver them to the committee. You actually delivered them to another entity, did you not?
That's correct. We delivered it.
Why did you not deliver it to the committee?
Well, because those documents contain classified and other sensitive materials and need to make sure they're handled appropriately.
All right. So are you willing to deliver all the unclassified documents to this committee?
So I think that
Yes or no? Because you can't have the first statement without the second statement. If the reason you sent it there was because it was classified, are you willing to give all the unclassified documents to this committee?
So the documents that we
Yes or no?
we will give so we've given certain documents to the committee already.
Yes or no? It's a real simple question. Will you give all the unclassified documents to this committee, since the reason that you gave them to somebody else was that there was classified documents?
So the documents.
Yes or no?
The documents have the restrictions on them. And
Yes or no? Why would they have, who placed the restrictions? You?
No.
FBI?
Yes.
So the answer is you place restrictions, so you're not going to give the unclassified documents to this committee.
So we've given this committee access to all the documents through.
That's not the question. It's a great answer to a question I didn't ask. Are you willing to give the unclassified documents to this committee?
All I can do is tell you that I'll take it back.
All right, so let me ask you another question, because you said that it was systematic. I went to the classified room, and there's two big binders there. One binder had some documents. The second binder that we got from the FBI had more documents than the first binder, and yet they were supposed to be identical. Would you say that was...
So I'd like to address this in the classified setting if I could. I think
was that an oversight?
I think the details are important of what the differences are.
But we just asked for a second copy, so would that not be haphazard? It doesn't seem too methodical, because when we went page for page, they didn't match up. So who made the decision to give us a different set?
I'd like to address that in the closed session, please.
Well, let me just say this. There was 27 new emails. There was a number of different types of information that didn't seem to go, and I don't want to share anything classified, so you admit that the first set and the second set were not identical.
They were not identical. There were some differences.
Okay. So what were the non-classification agency equities that prevented the initial disclosure of the 27 emails that we got in the second batch?